Hey, what's up everybody? It's Jason. Welcome back to the channel. I hope you're doing well. Today I've got a brand new album review for you, and this time it's Ariana Grande's latest, Positions. Alright, so I'd like to go ahead and caveat what I'm about to say by saying first that I think Ariana Grande is a hugely talented singer, and I think she's just hands down one of the best vocalists of this generation. But this album doesn't slap.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine.
Overall, the two main issues I had with this album personally were the production and the lyrics. From a production standpoint, I just felt like there was some odd choices, especially with kind of the orchestral sounds they were throwing in there. And then there's also a handful of songs that kind of go the R&B route. This obviously isn't an R&B album overall, but for the songs that do go that route, the production and the beats are just so simplistic, and it's all stuff that we've heard before that doesn't try to be anything else new or inventive. And in that sense, it was very frustrating to listen to an artist that has access to all these producers and all this equipment is as big as Ariana Grande, just to continue to go the safe route, which I guess you could argue is actually the definition and the job of artists that are that big and famous. But I just felt like, especially compared to her previous album, Thank You Next, there weren't as many risks, and this was just kind of like the same tried and true formula of songwriting. And then of course that brings us into the lyrics. I felt like a lot of the lyrics were either trendy, and we'll get obviously into the specifics of the songs a little bit later, but I felt they were trendy and they were just kind of like going for a very like targeted niche audience, or they were just very simple and repetitive, which made me really just it was a bit of a chore to listen to some of the songs. And I know I hate saying that, I've said it before on this channel, but it feels awful to say out loud, but it really just, as I was listening to this album, especially the third or fourth time, some songs I just wanted to skip, because with a lot of these songs, just within like the first minute of listening to them, you've heard pretty much everything that you're going to hear throughout the runtime of the entire song. And a lot of that has to do with the repetition of the lyrics. The pre-chorus and chorus just kind of keep going over and over again, and just not a lot of change in dynamics. Wow, alright, so that was a mouthful, but before we go ahead and dive into some of the individual songs off of the album, I just want to say that while overall the album I do think tends to lean towards the negative side for me, there are a couple of bright spots, and we'll be talking about those a little bit later as well. Alright, and with that said, let's go ahead and talk about the first track off the album, Shut Up. That's what it was called. So let's go ahead and talk about the first track off of the album, Shut Up. So if I'm being brutally honest, I think Shut Up is one of the worst songs, if not the worst song on the album, and which is just kind of a real shame because it's the one that kicks off the entire set list. But the reason I think it is, a lot of it has to do with the two main issues I was talking about, actually, the production and the lyrics. Vocally, I do think it's actually really impressive. Ariana Grande has a lot of really what I would consider, obviously because I'm not a singer, but what I would consider, even just as a listener, some very complex, very sophisticated runs in her voice. And to an extent, she's kind of a victim of her own success and her own talent, because we all know that she's such a fantastic vocalist. It's kind of expected, that she can hit those notes and she can do those runs almost flawlessly every time. And I think at this stage in her career, we've all kind of taken that for granted. But unfortunately, all of that vocal talent is really just crushed under the weight of what I think are really just two really odd and poor choices for the production and the lyrics of this song. Like I was touching on earlier, production-wise, a couple of these songs, actually a fair amount, I'd probably say about 4 or 5 out of 14, I think, total. 4 or 5 songs on this album kind of employ this orchestral sound, whether it's pizzicato on the violin, so that's just when they're like plucking at the strings like you would on a guitar, or it's full-on orchestra with a bow. I was in the orchestra in high school, can you tell? But anyways, to get back on track, the reason why I think it's a negative is because it just felt like this sound was kind of shoehorned into the song, and what I mean by that is it just felt like a producer somewhere was like, hey, this is like a really cool, unique, interesting sound, let's go ahead and throw it into the song. And the problem with that is that it felt inorganic. It is kind of a cool sound and you don't hear it often, but it didn't feel like it really had a place or a reason to be in that song. Just nothing really clicked. There wasn't even enough substance for it as a pop song, I think, to really justify its reason for being there. Alright, so the next song I want to talk about off the album is 34 plus 35, and the reason I'm calling that one out in particular is because at the time I'm recording this, that song is either number 1 or number 2 on the United States Top 50 on the Spotify like charts playlists. So obviously I'm reviewing this album a little bit after it had already come out, so I was curious definitely to see which ones had gained the most popularity as individual songs. And I saw that one on there, so I tried to pay particular attention to it when I was listening to this album to review it. And I actually don't think it's that bad of a song. As far as in comparison to the rest of the album, I think it's just kind of like in the middle. It's not great, it's not terrible. It's just kind of like a fun, easygoing song. I don't think it deserves to be as high as it is and as recognized as it is, because I definitely think there are better songs on our album than that. But this kind of goes into the whole trendy lyric thing that I was talking about earlier. And again, I totally understand that she's a pop artist, and that's kind of like part of the whole game. But the lyrics in the pre-chorus, I think they go something along the lines of, I've been drinking coffee, I've been eating healthy, I keep it squeaky.
What's your profanity?
I feel horrible saying that. That feels not good coming out of my mouth. Those lyrics kind of stick out to me and always remind me of lyrics that are probably going to end up on stuff like TikTok or Snapchat, whatever it may be. And with that, I think it really, this is a very extreme example, but I think it kind of takes away from the integrity of the music. It almost sounds like you're making the song just so it can be trendy, just so it can be used on things like TikTok. And I certainly hope that's not the intent. I don't mean to push that on Ariana Grande and the creators of this song, but I will say it just, it makes the song feel a little bit cheap. Clearly this might have been a very specific issue to me. There's people that probably have never even thought that when listening to this song, and clearly it's extremely popular, so maybe I'm the one missing out on something, I don't know. The next song I want to talk about is Love Language, and this one and Shut Up were the ones that I were thinking about when I was trying to figure out which song I think is the worst off this album. It really just switches back and forth between those two, which is to say that I think Love Language is also one of the worst songs off of this album. And a lot of the blame really just, it falls on the production yet again. I think that there are just a lot of strange choices made with this song. One of the oddest ones, I'll get to the orchestral part of it in a second, but one of the oddest ones is that this, for some reason they decided to go with this like weird 90s background noise, like you're in a cafe or something and you hear just like scattered conversations throughout. I didn't notice it until I put on headphones, but once I noticed it, even if I'm listening to it just like on my laptop or whatever it is, I can't stop hearing it. I think it's really distracting, and I don't think it adds to the song at all. And then we get to the violins in this song, which were very prominent throughout, and there's a couple of things with that. For some reason, it felt like the violins were just like a hair behind or before, I don't remember which.
Now, are you a rusher, or are you a dragger, or are you gonna be on my fucking time?
They were either a little early or a little soon in the beat, and it really kind of threw the whole thing off for me. I could be completely wrong. Maybe it's totally in beat, or maybe it is off beat and they did it on purpose. But either way, it's just the trills didn't really connect anything in the song for me. And then on top of that, I also felt like the noise level of the violins kind of drowned out Ariana Grande's voice throughout most of the song. It actually also happened in a couple other songs. I think it was just most prominent in Love Language. But it was drowning her out, man, and it made it really hard to kind of digest all the elements of the song at once. And then the last thing with the song, you already know what I'm going to say. Lyrically, it just throughout this album, I'm probably going to stop mentioning it at this point because it's so, like, it's out there. But lyrically, again, for the last time, I promise, it's just, there was no build-up. Thematically, it felt like nothing connected from one verse to another, even from one line to another in the chorus. At some point, it honestly just felt like the lyrics were there just to be there. I mean, as much as I enjoy the singing voice of Ariana Grande, there's so much left to be desired lyrically from this album. Alright, so there are two more songs in particular that I want to touch on before we wrap up this album review. The first one is Positions, which is, of course, the title track and the lead single off of this album. This song was just a little bit frustrating to me because I think it had potential. The main thing with Positions for me was that in every song, right, you have a certain number of elements, but I think the key to a good song is how you layer them and when you kind of expose them, right? So with the layering, I think what should ideally happen in a good song is you don't show the listener or expose the listener to every single element at the same time from the very beginning, right? What you do is you have a little bit here, a little bit there, and you just slowly start to add them all together until finally you get all of the elements combined into one, like at the climax of the song or at the very end of the song when it reaches its musical climax, like I said. That's what, to me, gives a song energy, what gives it drives, what makes it exciting to listen to, knowing that you're getting to somewhere, that build-up, that suspense. But this song didn't do that. It did the opposite, which is just gave you all those elements at once. There's no mystery, there's nothing left to be desired by the end of the song because you already know exactly what it's going to sound like within the first minute of that. So I honestly think that if they just layered it differently or they combined it differently so that not all of the elements were kind of exposed at once, Positions could have been actually a really great song. Alright, so the last song I'm going to talk about off this album is POV, and I truly think that this is like the saving grace of this album, and luckily it's also the last track off the album. The reason I think that I was so drawn to POV, and I don't even necessarily think that it's just good because it's the best on this album. I genuinely think that independent of those songs that I don't really enjoy too much, POV is actually a really great song, and it has to do with the vocal showcase that Ariana Grande puts throughout the entire track, and the pacing of it. So if we start with the pacing, it does exactly kind of what I would have wanted Positions or another song on the album to do, which is that it starts off a little bit slower, and then it builds, and then it builds a little bit more until finally, at the end of the song, you just when you have a vocalist like Ariana Grande in your booth, right, in your recording booth, you let her wail, man. And I totally understand that she was, in her previous albums, like let's say Dangerous Woman, for instance, she had already like showcased that she could belt it, and we all know that she can. So I understand that maybe she's tired of belting it out. But I don't think, and this is really the beauty of this song, she wasn't belting out just for the sake of belting it out, right? Like, I don't think just because you can sing really impressive and high notes or like really powerful notes that you're necessarily a great artist or a great singer. You might be a great singer, right? But I don't think you can just be a great artist purely based off of the fact that you can hit notes that other people can't. So that was a long way of saying that I understand if she doesn't want to hit those notes all the time because she's already, very much proven herself as someone who's talented enough to do that. But with that said, POV, and it all goes back to the pacing. She didn't sing it throughout the entire time. It wasn't like the chorus had a really powerful vocal performance. It wasn't until the very end, right? So she paced it out. It was well layered enough that you really felt like there was momentum and you were driving towards that point, so that when you get to it, it's just all that more satisfying. All right, so to wrap things up, overall, I do think that this album unfortunately was a little bit disappointing, and I didn't enjoy a majority of the songs on here, and it's just a real shame, especially in comparison to her last album, Thank You Next. It felt a lot more exploratory, Thank You Next did, and it felt like she was really able to engage with different parts of her voice and different aspects of production that made that album feel unique and stand out, in my opinion, on her discography. So then when you get to an album like Positions, it felt safe, and again, that's a real shame because it felt like Ariana Grande had enough momentum to really just grab hold of her own career and what she wanted to produce as an artist. And I don't mean to make assumptions. Maybe this is exactly what she wanted to produce as an artist. But for some reason, from my standpoint, that just doesn't feel like that's the way it went this time. If you're a fan of her, if you're a big enough fan of Ariana Grande, you might, actually I could probably say you will definitely get a kick out of a couple of songs off this album. But for me, it was a bit of a disappointment. And with that, I am going to leave Positions by Ariana Grande at a 5 out of 10. Alright, so that's going to do it for me, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Please be sure to let me know what you thought down below in the comments section. And if you enjoyed this content, please like or subscribe. That really helps out the channel. Until next time, stay safe, be kind. Thank you.